Hong Kong, 1954. The school is on the third floor of a building on Leighton Road in Kowloon. It is reached by a narrow staircase that smells of cooking from the floors below and that opens, at the top, into a training space that is larger than the building's exterior suggests. A long room with a wooden floor worn smooth by years of footwork, weapons on the walls, and at one end, a wooden dummy that has been used so many times it has developed a particular patina that is not paint and not polish, but the accumulated contact of 10,000 hours of practice. The master sits at a table near the window. He is in his early 30s in 1954, not old, not young, at the particular midpoint of a life that has already included exile from mainland China, the loss of everything that exile requires the loss of, and the reconstruction of a practice and a school in a city that is not where he is from, and that has not entirely decided what to do with him. His name is Ip Man. He is the grandmaster of Wing Chun Kung Fu. He has been teaching since before Bruce Lee was born. He has produced students who are themselves teachers, a lineage that extends backward through generations of practitioners and forward through the students now filling the training room on the third floor of the building on Leighton Road. He has seen every kind of student that a martial arts school produces, the diligent and the lazy, the naturally gifted and the naturally limited, the ones who will become teachers and the ones who will practice for a decade and then stop and remember it warmly for the rest of their lives without understanding what they had. He has not seen a student like Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee is 13 years old. He arrived at the school 8 months ago, brought by a friend who trained here and who had told Bruce about Wing Chun with the enthusiasm of someone who has found something they want to share. Bruce came with the particular mixture of skepticism and appetite that characterized everything he approached. Willing to be shown, not willing to be impressed without reason. Interested in the truth of the thing rather than its reputation. 8 months. In 8 months, he has absorbed what most students take 2 years to absorb. Not because his technique is the most refined in the school. It is not. There are students who have been here 5 years whose forms are technically superior to his. But because there is something in the way he learns that is different from the way other students learn. He does not learn the surface. He learns through the surface to the principle underneath. When Ip Man shows a technique, the other students see the technique. Bruce Lee sees what the technique is an expression of, the principle it is built to approximate, the truth it is trying to reach. He practices the technique, but what he is actually practicing is the principle, and this produces a quality in his movement that is different in kind from the quality produced by practicing the technique alone. Ip Man has been watching this for 8 months. He has been pleased by it and troubled by it simultaneously. The pleasure is obvious. A student of genuine depth is one of the rarest things in a teacher's experience, and Ip Man is old enough and honest enough to recognize one when he encounters one. The trouble is more complicated. The trouble is that Bruce Lee is beginning to ask questions that the system does not have answers for. Not questions about technique. Technique questions Ip Man can answer in his sleep, has answered 10,000 times, will answer 10,000 more. Bruce Lee's technique questions are indistinguishable from those of a gifted student finding the edges of the form. His other questions are different. He asks, why? Not why, as in, what is the reason for this technique? That question Ip Man welcomes. Why, as in, what is the reason for this system? Why, as in, what would happen if we combined this principle with a different delivery mechanism? Why, as in, the Wing Chun guard protects against this range of attacks, but what about this other range? And is there a modification of the principle that covers it? And if so, why isn't it in the system? These are not the questions of a student. These are the questions of someone who is already, at 13, treating the system as a starting point rather than a destination. Ip Man watches this with the complicated feeling of a teacher who has been given a student who may grow past the teacher's ability to contain them. a feeling that contains pride and recognition, and, underneath both of those, something he is honest enough to identify as the faint, specific unease of a man who can see the edges of his own knowledge approaching. He does not say any of this to Bruce Lee. He watches. He waits. Then one afternoon in 1954, during a training session that has gone unusually deep, Bruce Lee and another student sparring, Bruce Lee finding spaces in the other student's guard that the form does not account for, the movement becoming something that is recognizably Wing Chun and simultaneously something else, something that is using Wing Chun's principles as a foundation for movement that Wing Chun's forms do not prescribe. Ip Man calls a stop. He looks at Bruce Lee. He says, "Come here. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day." They sit at the table by the window. The other students continue their practice. They are aware that something is happening at the table. The quality of attention that a training space develops for significant moments is present. The particular alertness of people who know that something worth knowing is being said nearby. Ip Man looks at Bruce Lee for a moment. Then he says, "What you were doing just now. You know what you were doing." Bruce Lee says, "I was using the space." "You were using space that the form doesn't use," Ip Man says. "Yes," Bruce Lee says. He does not say it apologetically. He says it in the tone of someone confirming a fact. Ip Man is quiet. "The form doesn't use that space for reasons," he says. "The tradition has made decisions about what Wing Chun is. Those decisions were made by masters who understood what you are only beginning to understand. When you move outside the form, you are moving outside the accumulated wisdom of people who thought about these things more deeply than you have yet had time to think." Bruce Lee looks at him. He does not argue. He is 13 years old, and he is sitting across from the grandmaster of Wing Chun, and he has the particular intelligence to know that this moment requires listening rather than speaking. He listens. Ip Man says, "I am asking you to stay inside the form, to learn what the form contains before you look for what it does not contain. There is more inside the form than you have yet found, enough for many years. The time to look beyond it is after you have found all of it, not before." Bruce Lee is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "What if what's outside the form is also true?" Ip Man looks at him. "It may be," he says. "Many things outside many forms are true, but truth without discipline is not yet knowledge. It is instinct. Instinct is valuable, but instinct that has not been tested against the accumulated understanding of a tradition is only half of what it needs to be useful." Bruce Lee considers this. "I understand," he says. "I'm asking you to stay inside the form," Ip Man says again. "Not as a command, as a request." The distinction is meaningful. Ip Man is a grand master of his art, but he is, in this moment, making a request of a 13-year-old boy, and both of them feel the quality of that. Bruce Lee says, "I will try." He does not say, "I will." He says, "I will try." Ip Man hears the distinction. What happened in the years that followed was not a rupture. This is the thing about the story of Ip Man and Bruce Lee that tends to get simplified in the telling. The relationship reduced to a series of dramatic confrontations, the student rebelling against the master, the young revolutionary overthrowing the old tradition. The reality was more complicated and more human, and ultimately more interesting than that. Bruce Lee tried. He stayed inside the form for the better part of a year. He practiced with the discipline that Ip Man had asked for, going deeper into the Wing Chun system rather than beyond it, finding things in the form that his impatience had caused him to move past too quickly. He found them. Ip Man was right, that there was more inside the form than he had yet found. There was considerably more, and finding it required exactly the kind of disciplined attention that moving outside the form had been allowing him to avoid. He became, in that year of staying inside, technically better. And the questions did not stop. They could not stop. They were not a product of impatience or arrogance or the rebellion of a young person against an older person's authority. They were a product of the particular quality of Bruce Lee's mind. the mind that looked at everything it encountered and asked not just what is this, but what is this for? Not just how does this work, but what principle makes it work? And if the principle is true here, where else is it true, and what does it look like there? The questions kept coming. Ip Man answered the ones he could answer. For the ones he could not answer, he did something that not all teachers are able to do. He said so. He said, "This is the edge of what I know." The tradition does not have an answer to this question. That does not mean the question is wrong. It means the tradition has not yet asked it. Bruce Lee heard this as permission. Ip Man did not intend it as permission. This was the nature of the problem between them. Not hostility, not power struggle, but the specific miscommunication of a teacher who respected the limits of a tradition, and a student who could not stop treating every limit as an invitation. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. By 1961, when Bruce Lee left Hong Kong for Seattle, he had been training with Ip Man for 7 years. In those 7 years, he had become one of the most technically accomplished Wing Chun practitioners in the school. Not the most accomplished. There were students who had been there longer and whose forms were more refined, but accomplished in the specific, deep way that comes from genuinely understanding what you are practicing, rather than merely executing it. He had also, quietly and without declaration, begun building something that was not Wing Chun, not against Wing Chun, not in opposition to it, built on Wing Chun, the way a building is built on a foundation. The foundation is essential. The building would not stand without it, but the building is not the foundation. What Bruce Lee was developing used Wing Chun's principles as a foundation for a structure that the Wing Chun tradition had not prescribed and had not anticipated. He did not announce this to Ip Man. He did not need to. Ip Man could see it. On the day before Bruce Lee left for Seattle, he came to the school to say goodbye. The training room was quiet. It was early morning before the students arrived, and Ip Man was at the table by the window doing what he often did in the early mornings, which was nothing in particular, simply sitting with the quality of presence that decades of practice produces in people who have learned that sitting can be its own form of training. Bruce Lee came in. He bowed. Ip Man looked at him. They sat at the table. Neither of them said anything for a while. The silence had the quality of a conversation that has already happened, the long conversation of 7 years that did not need to be summarized because both of them had been present for it, and both of them knew what it had contained. Then Ip Man said, "What are you going to do in America?" Bruce Lee said, "Teach." "Wing Chun?" Ip Man said. A pause. "What I've learned," Bruce Lee said. Ip Man looked at him. "That is not the same thing," he said. "No," Bruce Lee agreed, "it is not." Another silence. "The foundation is Wing Chun," Bruce Lee said. "Everything I build will be built on what you gave me. I want you to know that." Ip Man was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that Bruce Lee would carry with him for the rest of his life, and that Bruce Lee described, in later years, as the most important thing his teacher ever said to him. He said, "A teacher's job is to make himself unnecessary. If you have gone further than the form, it is because the form did its job. I am not angry. I am finished." He paused. "Go teach," he said. Bruce Lee bowed. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned. He said, "I will tell my students where it came from." Ip Man nodded once. Bruce Lee left. Jeet Kune Do, the art that Bruce Lee would spend the rest of his life developing, the system that was not a system, the way that was no way, was built on a Wing Chun foundation. This is documented. Not in the romantic way that origins are sometimes documented, with the mythology smoothed and the conflicts resolved and the lineage made to look inevitable in retrospect. In the specific, technical way. The centerline theory, the economy of motion, the simultaneous attack and defense, the close-range sensitivity that Wing Chun calls Chi Sao, all of it present in Jeet Kune Do, transformed and extended and placed in conversation with every other martial tradition Bruce Lee studied, but present. Ip Man knew this. He lived until 1972, long enough to see Enter the Dragon in production, long enough to watch his student become the most famous martial artist in the world, long enough to see the thing Bruce Lee built. He was asked, in an interview in his final years, what he thought of his most famous student. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, "He refused to stop. I asked him to stay inside the form. He said he would try. He tried, and then he went further." This is the quality that makes someone a master. Not that they learn the tradition, but that they learn it so completely that they can see what it is pointing toward. Bruce saw what Wing Chun was pointing toward. He went there. He paused. "The tradition is the finger pointing at the moon," he said. Bruce stopped looking at the finger. He was quiet. "This is what I wanted," he said, "even when I did not know I wanted it. Be water. Learn the form completely. Then find what the form was pointing toward all along." That is what Ip Man gave Bruce Lee. That is what Bruce Lee gave the world. The foundation holds. It always will. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day.